مرحبا وأهلا بكم في برنامج داخل واشنطن. معكم مضيفكم روبرت ساتلوف. أخيرا وبعد أشهر من الانتظار بدأ السباق. لا مزيد من جس النبض، لا مزيد من اللجان الاستكشافية، لا مزيد من المشاورات مع الأصدقاء والأسرة. لدينا الآن مرشحون حقيقيون لخلافة باراك أوباما في منصب الرئيس القادم للولايات المتحدة. على الجانب الجمهوري السباق مفتوح على مصراعيه. أعلن 3 مرشحين بالفعل عن ترشحهم، ومن المنتظر أن يعلن 4 أو 5 آخرين كلهم من الرجال. على الجانب الديمقراطي الوضع مختلف جدا. توجد مرشحة واحدة فقط، وربما تكون هناك مرشحة واحدة فقط لنيل ترشيح الحزب، ألا وهي وزيرة الخارجية السابقة والسيناتور السابق والسيدة الأولى السابقة هيلاري كلينتون. لم يحدث أبدا من قبل في التاريخ الأمريكي أن بدأت المنافسة على الرئاسة بهذا الشكل. لمناقشة الأيام الأولى للسباق الرئاسي لعام 2016 يسرني أن أرحب باللجنة المكونة من الخبيرين السياسيين نورمان أورنستين وستيف كليمنز. Welcome back to Dakhel, Washington. I'm sitting here with my panel of political experts. Hello, gentlemen.
Good morning.
Hello, Rob.
So finally, we have candidates, real live candidates who have announced their candidacy for the presidency of the United States. So let's start with the Democrats. We have one, Hillary Clinton. She announced recently. She made big news. Was this a surprise?
The timing was a little bit of a surprise. She wanted to wait as long as she possibly could, and then found that for a variety of reasons she had to announce. The surprise, if there's any here, though, is simply that we have an unprecedented situation. This, we've had instances where presidential nominations are wrapped up early. It's always an incumbent president running for re-election who's popular. To have an open contest with effectively one candidate who completely dominates the field is new. There will be other Democrats, but they have very little chance of winning a nomination.
So why now? Why did Hillary Clinton announce
Well, I
now?
think that the conventional wisdom in the press was that she was afraid. She began to see action on the Republican side, and she also saw her negatives building in terms of polling in the press, and wanted to get out and be able to kind of wrestle those down and begin introducing herself to the public. I think that what's interesting is I recently had a delayed flight, and so on the day she announced, I asked everybody on the plane, mostly Americans, what they thought. And so many of them weren't comparing her to the potential Republicans, they were comparing her to her husband. And if you talk to people about Jeb Bush on the Republican side, many were saying, such a different contrast to his brother. So we may be in this odd zone that rather than comparing Republicans to Democrats, we may be in a case where we're comparing candidates to their previous either brothers or husbands.
Very interesting.
And that makes something quite interesting as well, because what Republicans are going to try to do with Hillary Clinton is to remind people of all the bad things about the Bill Clinton years. The scandals, the cover-ups as they saw it, all of those things that made people uncomfortable. While Democrats are going to be pointing to the really good things, which included an economy that boomed and a budget that moved into not just balance but surplus. Mm-hmm. And at the moment, it looks like the Democrats have the upper hand on that one. The controversy over Secretary Clinton's emails seems to have had little impact on the public, at least to this point.
So what's the big reason why she's running, other than the obvious? She wants to be president, ambition. What's her big issue?
I think the big fundamental current that drives her and many of her supporters is the issue of women's place in the world. That breaking through that glass ceiling, taking this position, that is not a policy. That is a sort of an achievement agenda, as opposed to a set of policies. You could say that Hillary Clinton has been great on development issues, or women around the world and education, and trying to develop the soft power or smart power. But really what drives Hillary Clinton and her supporters is the women's issue more than anything else.
Now, she's going to run in a slightly different way, though, although Steve hits it, and it's important to realize that when she ran in 2008, she didn't emphasize at all the fact that she was a woman candidate. It was a candidate for president. This time, she's running to break that glass ceiling.
She's leaning in.
Yeah.
But as Sheryl Sandberg's book called Lean In, Women, moving forward, this is Hillary at the presidential level leaning in.
But if you looked at her announcement video, very low-key video on YouTube, you had 2 minutes. The first minute I watched and I thought I must have gotten the wrong video because there was no mention of Hillary Clinton. It was people striving, middle-class people, individuals looking for their first job, trying to move jobs, getting married, all of those things before you saw Hillary Clinton. This was, it's not about me, it's about you. It's about people trying to make it in this world, and the issue that she's going to be running on is inequality. It is, why is it that we haven't been fighting for people who, even as the economy improves, are struggling just to make ends meet?
So, but how do you translate that vague, nice theme of inequality into a policy? I mean, Barack Obama spent the first couple of years healthcare for Americans. What's her banner going to be?
I think it's going to be very hard for her because what Norm is really talking about is that she's going to try to surface this issue of a new social contract with working Americans who are sort of being left behind by rich folks in the financial world and by a winner-takes-all society. And in that new social contract, she's going to have to reflect on the fact that she's been very distant from their world for a long time. She hasn't driven a car in probably 20 years. She hasn't really gone out and done many of the normal things that most Americans do. Her husband and she and their family through the Clinton Global Initiative have done a lot of great things in the world, but the set they run with are sort of the ultra billionaires. And I think that what Norm is talking about from a policy perspective is, I think, an important one for the nation. It's going to be interesting to see how she sells it, because it's easy to see other candidates, Marco Rubio, who came from very constrained circumstances, or some of the other potential nominees down the road who didn't come from what now looks like political aristocracy on the Clinton side.
Let me ask this question. So the conventional wisdom is that not having a serious competitor for the nomination is a negative.
Oh, yeah.
That it's better off having competitors. Do you agree with that?
I think if you have not run before, or you haven't run in a long time, getting that tough competition can hone you for a fall campaign. But the fact is, it is a far bigger asset to be able to run without really serious competition than to have it. And for a couple of reasons. One is the nature of presidential campaigns to win over primary voters, the party faithful. You have to move towards the ideological extreme. You move left if you're a Democrat, you move right if you're a Republican, and then you try to move back to the middle in the fall campaign. For the Republicans, it's going to be extremely difficult because they're moving very far to the right. For Clinton, she will have to make some bows to the left. Most of her challengers will come from her left. Her theme is an Elizabeth Warren theme, even though Elizabeth Warren isn't running. But she can now amass massive sums of money, not have to spend them out during the campaign, will not have to move nearly as far or make those gestures to that base, can position herself for the fall, and sit back and basically be like an incumbent president. We call it the Rose Garden strategy, where you're issuing edicts from above while the others are ripping themselves apart. So I think it is a major asset, much more than it is a liability.
Well, I agree with Norm on the whole. If you remember Barack Obama's first debate with Mitt Romney when they were running against each other in Denver, and Obama was overconfident, ill-prepared. No one had told him anything negative about his performance in 4 years. And so he went in untested without any challenge. And I fear that Hillary Clinton is going to have that same problem, where the notion of being anointed, of not being challenged, of just sort of being there. And she has a problem that most people know already, of having difficulty connecting with people. And unless she feels that drive that she needs to connect more than someone else, she may come off more as a queen than someone actually running for those people that have been left behind.
Okay, just a few seconds left in this segment. I want to ask you about a Shakespearean character, our poor vice president. Any other election year, he would be the odds-on candidate, odds-on favorite to be his party's nominee. The poor guy gets no respect.
No respect.
Joe Biden.
Where's Rodney Dangerfield?
Why isn't he running for president?
You know, Joe Biden is extremely well liked by the Democratic Party faithful. He has been, despite a lot of the late night comics making fun of him, an excellent vice president who's given terrific advice to the president. He's got a great life story as well. But I think partly because of his age, partly because of his previous runs for president, but mostly because Clinton is such a towering figure out there, there's simply no traction for him. If she weren't running, he would be eager to get into the race. But remember, too, Joe Biden's been around for a very long time, and if it's not Clinton, there's probably going to be a desire for a new, fresh, younger face. So it's just not the right time for him. It's really unfortunate for him.
I completely agree. Joe Biden is a great guy. He's probably the most natural politician in Washington today, connects with people, smart, and it is just unfortunate that the stars aren't lining up.
Okay, we'll be back in just a moment to switch our topics and focus on all those Republicans running for president. Again, my panelists are Norman Ornstein. Sitting to his left is Steve Clemens. Steve is Washington editor-at-large for The Atlantic and editor of Atlantic Live, as well as a senior fellow and founder of the American Strategy Program at the New America Foundation. So, gentlemen, the Republicans, on that side we have a gaggle of candidates already. Steve, who's already has announced their candidacy?
The one that is certain to announce that hasn't yet announced is, of course, Jeb Bush, who is, in a way, not as prominent in the field as Hillary Clinton, but from a money perspective, looks like he's got a very long road of sustainable money. And oftentimes when you begin carrying candidates, you can compare them on policy, personality, where they're from, what the kind of initial sizzle is. But at the end of the day, you say, who's going to be the last person standing? And oftentimes that's a function of money. And Jeb Bush, who's not yet announced, looks pretty good.
And then in addition to these four, there's another group that's waiting in the wings.
The Detroit News a week or so ago had a front page with 21 pictures on it. And some of them are not going to run, but there may be 15 significant candidates. And they're going to have a real challenge deciding who gets included in televised debates and who doesn't. You have a number of governors. Chris Christie of New Jersey, Scott Walker of Wisconsin, who's sort of shot up as somebody who's getting a lot of attention, Bobby Jindal, the governor of Louisiana, former governor and former candidate Rick Perry of Texas, Mike Huckabee, who's run before, Rick Santorum, a former senator. The list goes on and on and on, all the way down to Donald Trump. This is going to be a zoo in a lot of ways. And while under normal circumstances you would say Jeb Bush would be the obvious front runner, I don't think there is a front runner. And one of the most important elements, Steve alluded to the money, Jeb Bush has already strong-armed almost all of the traditional major fundraisers for the Republicans, saying you're with me now or you're dead to me. And he's gotten them. And he's talking about, credibly, raising $100 million for the primary campaign, which normally would swamp everybody else. Ted Cruz, who you would normally think of as a fringe candidate, somebody over on the radical right, announces his candidacy. Within a week, he has pledges for outside money, these super PACs, of $31 million. So we're going to have candidates. If you have one billionaire who likes you a lot, you can stay in the race for a long period of time. And we're looking at a very sustained process without a clear front runner.
So when you look at this broad group, ideologically, what separates them? It seems like there's Rand Paul on one end, a large group of people in the middle, and then a fringe on the other
end.
end.
It depends on which scale you're looking at. If it's national security, for instance, one of the names Norm didn't mention, but I think he's itching to get in, is Lindsey Graham. And Lindsey Graham is already running against Rand Paul. Every chance he gets, he knocks down Rand Paul on national security and says anyone else in the field would be better with Rand Paul. Even Hillary Clinton would be better than Rand Paul. So he's positioning himself on that front. But if you look at economic issues, if you look at immigration, if you look at gay rights, if you look at what the potential Iran deal, all of them are slightly different shades of gray from each other. And it's going to be a very crowded market and hard for them to differentiate themselves from each other, but they will. The most seeming moderate across the board, whether it's on the gay rights issue or on immigration policy or even on economic stakeholding or things like education and national a core curriculum, core standards, Jeb Bush is in that position and has not yet been pushed. You've got Ted Cruz, Rand Paul, and others clearly attracting a more animated, passionate part of what they see as their Republican base. And you're going to see a lot of, I think, somersaults, through the process as people kind of move up and down. But it's not really a clear scale of moderate extremist or, someone who's willing to, be a weak, old, kind of antiquated candidate.
It'll tell you a lot about today's Republican Party that Jeb Bush, who as a governor of Florida was over at the right end of the spectrum, more conservative than his brother George W. Bush, now is the moderate. But if we're looking for one division here, it's establishment versus non-establishment. Rand Paul started to run as a libertarian, like his father, Ron Paul. But his announcement was focused on how he's running against the Washington establishment. And Ted Cruz's whole campaign is based on defeating the establishment. That's what puts Bush into some jeopardy because the positions that he's taken, as Steve suggested, the Common Core on education, on immigration, are anathema to the radical right wing of the party. And he's going to have to defend something that is difficult. And one of the other twists here is that the leaders in Congress, the Republicans having control of both houses of Congress, are going to be doing compromises over the next year. They're going to try and keep the government from shutting down, make sure we don't have another crisis over the debt limit. And the right is going to be upset with that, and that's going to bring an anti-establishment backlash. Is there somebody who can thread that needle? Can a Marco Rubio or a Scott Walker emerge as somebody who's not going to be frightening to the establishment of the party, but will be acceptable to the anti-establishment wing? That's the big question moving forward.
So this person may or may not win the nomination, but among all these names you've mentioned, who would be the toughest challenger to Hillary Clinton?
Jeb Bush. In my book, Jeb
Why?
Bush. Because I think at the end of the day, Jeb comes off as someone whose clutch is not stuck in one place, and he's able to play across a number of fields, and he's able to draw on different currents. So some people, people find the Bush name to be a ball and chain that might be a problem, but the Bush brand, that it gives him a certain celebrity status that's important. His role as a governor, this is true of Scott Walker and Bobby Jindal also, makes him a chief executive in waiting, if you will. And I think that many people who look at the two of them still have a hard time with the notion of Hillary Clinton as a chief executive. So I think that there, and I would have said the same had the bridge scandal not happened, that Chris Christie would have been another candidate I thought who could beat Hillary Clinton. And I think that less now, but in my view, Jeb is probably the front runner.
I so rarely disagree with Steve that it's nice to have an opportunity to do so. I think Marco Rubio would be the toughest challenger. The biggest problem, remember, we have had since the Franklin Roosevelt era only one time when a party won the presidency 3 times in a row. And that was George Herbert Walker Bush succeeding Ronald Reagan. After a president has been in and a party's had a president for 2 terms, there's a desire for change out there, and you have to fight the headwinds if you're the candidate. The template for Hillary Clinton is George Herbert Walker Bush. Right. The difficulty is somebody who represents change and dynamism. Jeb Bush doesn't do that. Rubio, who's young, articulate, smart, attractive, if he manages to overcome hurdles, and that includes some personal issues and scandals in his own past, to win a nomination is going to make it harder for her to be the candidate of change at a time when that's going to be important.
Okay, so looking at the party that we're talking about here, what is the chance that the candidate you think is the toughest candidate in fact, is going to win his party's nomination?
I think there's a shot at it, but if I'm laying the odds of a Marco Rubio winning in a field of 15 are probably no more than 10 or 15%. Right.
And Jeb Bush winning the nomination?
I think, somebody told me one time with John Kerry, who looked like the most lackluster candidate in a field of other candidates, someone told me early on he's going to have the longest money line, be the last guy standing, and that person ended up being right. Not the person I would have run in that particular thing, but I think Jeb Bush is in a situation that despite the billionaire friends that some of the other candidates may have, and I think that will be a challenge, the systemic strength of the money line that Jeb Bush has will keep him in the field longer than anyone else. It'll be a terrible gladiatorial battle, and he'll be the last guy in the field because of the money.
Okay, gentlemen. Well, we sound like we have lots of fodder for discussion about the presidential election for more than a year to come. Thank you for joining us for this discussion, and we'll be back again before long.
Thank you.
بهذا نصل إلى نهاية هذه الحلقة من برنامج داخل واشنطن. إذا كانت لديكم أي استفسارات أو تعليقات حول هذه الحلقة، وخاصة حول كيف يختار الحزبان المرشحين للبيت الأبيض، أرجو أن تراسلوني مباشرة على عنوان البريد الإلكتروني التالي insidewashington@alhurra.com. معكم روبرت ساتلوف، شكرا لكم وإلى اللقاء.